I'm going to go on the limb here and do something that doesn't seem terribly godly to me. I've got preoccupied, as you know, with a lady's, is it Sarah Paine? I'll get the first name right, put it right later, but and I thought, well, thinking of the Second World War, Hitler, well, I thought, first of all, Churchill, I thought, was he a Freemason? I find he was. How big and earnest, I'm not sure. And then I thought, well, was Roosevelt a Freemason? That's likely, and I find he was. I then thought the next big character on the scene was, of course, Hitler, and I ought to understand Hitler's childhood and background and culture rather better, which I don't know much about German culture. I'm just English, with the total biases of a Victorian dad and an emancipated mum. So I thought, well, I'll just ask Google, what's the early life of Hitler? And of course, it then occurs to me, I wonder if Hitler was a Freemason. And I find, on the contrary, no, he was persecuting them. Well, there we have it, don't we? Why the Second World War came out the way it came, as far as I could see, it occurs to me strongly. There's no way Roosevelt wanted Hitler to take Europe, because that would mean the end of Freemasonry in Europe. And in that regard, I mean, the bond between Churchill, an empire builder, and Roosevelt, anything but an empire builder from the point of view of the British Empire. Anyway, the Americans were independent of Britain, weren't they, from War of Independence onwards, or before, tried to be. So it occurs to me this love relationship between the two was something to do with the Masonics. And that would give a very tangible link in the determination of Roosevelt to get America into the war, to stop Europe falling to the communists. The country, America, wouldn't have liked it to fall to the Russians either, of course, and that's the usual argument. If Russia does beat, but it didn't look as though, I'm not sure. Did it look as though Russia would definitely win? I don't think so. I mean, Hitler was charging on to Moscow and so on. I don't think the optimism was such that Russia would finally overcome, in which case Europe would be fascist, Nazi, and not just persecuting all Jews, of course. That was, well, what it was, and the West hadn't done a great deal about it. Not really. They weren't ostensibly in the war to protect Jews. They were in the war, well, England was in the war technically to protect Poland. Or to, it's a bit late to come on the scene to protect Poland, but yeah, etc. So my thesis as a, well, not a modest man, but not a great historian, is that a major drive was something to do with this Masonic thing, that Freemasonry in the United States would hardly be delighted at Europe falling to a regime that was determined to wipe out Freemasons, along with various other groups that it didn't like. Well, I'm aware here that I haven't brought God into the picture, and I was listening to the lady last night at another philosophy meeting, and she was holding forth on, the Cold War, that's right, and very ably, and she went through endless, she went through something like 7 or 8 explanations as to why it's been hypothesized the Cold War came to an end, the first Cold War as she sees it. And I started to feel uncomfortable because I realized, no, I want to bring God into this, and I wonder if I bring God into this, it would give another explanation as to why the Cold War finished. Her argument was basically, well, all the theories, points that they raised contributed to the decline. And of course, we do see that with major happenings, don't we? I mean, she gave another discourse in another series of talks on Japan and why it lost its war in the Second World War with America. And all the various theories seem to contribute and bring them all together, a focus of causes and conditions, and perhaps that's what did it. And without any one of them, any one of the explanations, the outcome might have been different. And so too with something like what constitutes the end of the Cold War between the Soviet Union and America is, well, really, the collapse of the Soviet Union, isn't it? Whatever caused that. We're fairly clear, from a Western point of view, at least, what that was. And she tries to be clear from both a Soviet or Russian point of view as well. But I was uncomfortable because I started to realize, and of course we're not bringing God into this. Now, how's this explanation suit you, Marshall? What happens if you bring God in? Does that actually give a different understanding? And at this precise point, I don't have it. Although I do feel I've come up with rather an interesting point as regards Freemasonry and the eventual outcome of the Second World War. Of course, I haven't really brought God into that. I don't feel I brought God in by bringing up the spectre of Freemasonry. Although in some sense it's a spiritual entity. It's not my view of God, of course, except that it's in someone's view of God. I wonder what the view of God is that might be majoring, or even the lack of the view of God that's majoring during the Cold War, and that might contribute to its eventual climax of dissolution, if you call that a climax. Well, to attempt a consistency, I suppose I would say I would have to assume that the leadership of the US during the Cold War is still fundamentally Freemasonry, Masonic, if it has any spiritual content at all. And the spiritual content of the Soviet Union by which I think I mean specifically the Russian culture and view at the time, was an extreme persecution of Christians from the Christian point of view. I wonder how they viewed Freemasons. Let me check that. Right, well that didn't take 2 minutes, and on that I find, according to Google, you might think flimsy evidence, but we'll see how we go. They were utterly against Freemasonry. They saw it as bourgeois capitalist ideology, part of it, and persecuted it, basically. Right. Being consistent then with my understanding of yet another major contribution, if not cardinal, of significance rather. I extend it to the understanding of the Cold War, its development, and the driving force militarily between East and West in the Cold War. That, communism has to be utterly wiped out, and the McCarthy movement and so on, right back against communism, extends in its suspicion, to say the least, and rejection of communism. It must be destroyed. Now look, I don't know much about McCarthyism and so on, and the hatred of communism in the US, and you might know much more than me. But I do feel pretty clear that the fervour with which America is led to be against communism is something to do with the Masonic leaders, basically influenced by Masonry, and being Masons, perhaps many of them. And that was the view of the Eastern Bloc. So, yes, Eastern Bloc didn't like religion, certainly didn't like Christianity as being very much of the capitalist society, and Freemason probably realized much of its leadership. So, is that an ideological warfare between the two, the Cold War? Yes, I think so. And much the same as what I see as contributing to the partnership, the support of America to determining the outcome of the Second World War as well, earlier. Where are we today? Well, following the lady's view, the primary enemy of the United States is communism, whether it's in the form of Russia or China, in as far as either pretend some allegiance to what they call communism, because such is ideologically opposed to the spiritual background to the leadership of the West. End of story, says Marshall. Now look, this is not my specialist field, so I'm only putting it forward as well, actually, the reason I was putting it forward was because I felt the spiritual nature of the debate was lacking, because the lady herself, the historian, is probably not focused on religious things, spiritual things as such, but more what we would call ideological things, perhaps, and circumstances and so forth. And brilliantly, I mean, I find her discourses, I'm going to say enchanting, and I'm slightly negative about that because I'm so aware that it's so lacking in reference to God, which I find very suspect, and I'm still working on it. I need something more than I've got here in this recording. I'm motivated to say, but what happens if God in this picture of explanations and understandings? I'm wanting to say, what's my Heavenly Father doing or allowing? No, I think more than allowing, having happened in the world on its international major scene of conflict stroke cooperation as we charge through the 21st century. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Yes, I've got it. Again, Sarah Paine's view. You don't want to give, I've forgotten the American phrase she used, but you don't want the enemy to feel you're going to wipe them out if you're the victor. Because they've got nothing to lose then in their ferocity of trying to wipe you out first. And you may think this is not valid that I'm going to say, but I'm going to say this, that if you're against my religion and I'm a fanatic, then if you want to destroy my religion, what you're saying is you want to destroy me. And if I'm fanatic enough, I resist that like the plague. I am ferocious in killing you first. And in a sense, well, I mean, we could imagine that in a sense, the anti-communist view is almost tantamount to saying we're going to wipe out all communists. If necessary, because communism is so disastrous, such a death to us and our capitalism as we see it. It's the evil in the world and it's got to be removed. And if that means killing the enemy, kill the enemy, we will. And of course, in some sense, wars are always this, aren't they? I'm willing to kill you over this issue. But I'm still willing to kill you if I get my way. Now that's a stage further along the game, isn't it? I mean, my goodness, that's frightening for the enemy. There's no way we can lose this, because if we lose it, we're dead. So it's win or die. We're trying to win, but we're not going to just take it. At least we stand a chance if we fight. And ideological wars are like that, between, say, Muslim and Christian in the time of the Crusades. It looked as though they were really, even if I win, you're in danger of me wiping you out. In fact, the Muslims were not like that, provided you paid the tax and submitted to Islam in some sense. Well, you could keep your life, that's fine. I think that was the view, wasn't it? Whether the enemy, namely the Crusaders, believed that was quite another thing. But the Muslims may well have seen the Crusaders, who were, well, barbaric, really, weren't they? Wouldn't say they were Christian. If the Crusader wins, does he just kill the Muslims anyway? I would have thought many Muslims felt that was the case. And of course, what usually happens in the war is that the leaders are likely to get killed. Even in our most civilized way, we try them for war crimes, which of course is a set-up job. We know they're guilty from the beginning. I mean, it's just The judge is not a Nazi, is he? At the Nuremberg trials, I gather he wasn't anyway. Oh my goodness, I would assume he was, no, of Christian sort of background or no, secular background or whatever. But anyway, it's a set-up job, we know. The leadership always feel if they lose. I mean, what happened to Saddam Hussein? I mean, did we give him a pension and retirement in Eastbourne? No, I don't think so. I think we executed him, didn't we? Yes. You see, Sarah's got a point, and a very deep spiritual point. I don't know if she realised it, but if we were more compassionate in how we dealt with what we see as criminals, perhaps we would, end conflicts a bit sooner. But I mean, if the leaders themselves are fighting to the death, and death's going to be if I surrender. I'm not surrendering. I'm pleased with myself. You see, bringing God into it. Well, I mean, compassion. You don't have to be into believing God is your Heavenly Father to be compassionate, do you? I mean, you might be compassionate because, I don't know, you're a good Buddhist or something, So, but could you be compassionate and secular? Yes. I mean, I know this firsthand. I mean, I was secular until I was 24, and I was a humanist. I didn't think we were treating criminals right. Isn't there a better way? I mean, do we have to execute? Do we have to kill in order? That's, from a secular point of view, a barbaric, to use the word right there, out of context in a way, but the barbaric Judaic view that, if you kill, you must be killed and executed. Death for a death. Actually, Hebrew view wasn't quite that bad. You could flee, I think, to a city of refuge. Well, at least if it was manslaughter, and not sure. Well, I think fundamentally it was an eye for an eye sort of thing, yeah. So a quick review, an overview of what I'm getting here. If communism is utterly against any form of what we might term religion, even spirituality, that's slightly less fair to claim that they're against spirituality. Were, anyway. And I'm sure there are exceptions even then. I mean, you have Christian communists, can you? Sort of. But anyway, when it comes to regimes, no, it's fairly straightforward. They're anti-God. And even, can I say, Western leadership, whether it was hangover of the Christian religion ethos, or whether it was Masonic leadership, or whether it was compassion for perhaps those that knew of it, Jewish persecution by Hitler. Was it known that well during the... It didn't seem to be majorly known, did it? By the population. It wasn't their main motivation, was it? It was just this Hitler wanting to rule Europe and we've got to stop him at all costs sort of thing. But yes, very broadly speaking, it is worth remembering the religious background being, could I say, stronger at the time. I'm not sure about the Masonic influence, how strong, but things like what we think of as normal Christian type background of Catholicism and Protestantism and whatever, versus a world that could become no religion, destroy it, and possibly those that practice it ruthlessly destroy it. That's got to be dealt with. And therefore the hostility to communism has to be seen at least partly in that light. I'm back to several contributing causes again, but it's a major one when your leadership has a particular spirituality, if you like to call it that, of Freemasonry. And you are utterly against that because you see it as part of, as a communist you would see it as part of bourgeois, capitalist ideology, religion. It's all rubbish and it's got to be destroyed. And it's not only that, but it's the cause of the immiseration of the populace as a whole, if you like, in communist terms, the working class. Of course, propaganda may be fought on all sorts of ideological, emotive language, backgrounds and so on. But I think the spiritual religious divide to non-religion of communism is a major one. In what way does that bring the end of the Cold War? Well, the eternal cooperation of the West in being hostile to anything communist. And, well, quite simply doing its best to immiserate the Soviet Union, Russia in particular, and gradually by attrition and so forth, succeeds in the collapse of the Soviet Union, if nothing else because the Russians fear the military build-up of the West to such an extent that they impoverish their society by literally the arms race. The build-up of defence and the diversion of resources from the welfare of the people, you could say. And you end up with a union that falls to pieces. Both the union itself, satellite-wise, and Russia itself, people-wise within it, who increasingly are not having a good time. Yep. Thank you, Heavenly Dad. Well, that was very long, was it? And a bit rambling. Sorry about that. And at least it's all in one place and it's done in half an hour. Thank you, Heavenly Father.